The reign of King Ahab in the northern kingdom was initially characterized by economic prosperity, but idol worship creeped in and became more prevalent when Ahab married Jezebel. Jezebel was the daughter of King Sidon, a devoted worshiper of Baal. Now, Baal was the fertility god. 3.5 years before the events of our lesson, Elijah had marched up the steps of the palace into the throne room of King Ahab and announced that there would be no rain again except by the word of the prophet, and the prophet was merely a tool of God. The clouds and the rain were driven from the land of Israel, and the pain and the misery that comes with a drought was within the kingdom.
Until I say so. Then the Lord spoke to Elijah, saying, Go away from here and hide by the brook Cherith.
Like today, Ahab wanted to kill the messenger rather than consider the message. Under the influence of Jezebel, Ahab searched both Israel and neighboring countries. The king was angry and frustrated at these attempts to locate Elijah that failed. Meantime, Jezebel worked her homicidal vengeance on all the prophets of the Lord that she could capture, as if their execution would somehow bring an end to the drought. Clearly, she saw the Lord's prophets as extremists and desired them to be crushed, all resistance eliminated, killing the prophets and striking fear in the people, deterring the worship of the real God. King Ahab, in fact, didn't care because he was already worshiping Baal. God told Elijah to show himself to King Ahab. It was time to demonstrate the power of the true God and for the nation to choose which they would follow. God brought about a meeting with Ahab through another of God's servants, Obadiah. Now, let's remember, the land is experiencing a severe famine, and Obadiah was in the court of the king, in charge of the household of the king, a steward and manager of the palace and all its affairs. It was a high position. He was a believer in the true God, though. Because of his faithfulness, he had hidden 100 prophets from Jezebel, who was seeking to kill them. Like modern Christians, his faith, however, needed maturity and encouragement. Following Ahab's orders, Obadiah began searching Israel for green pastures to feed his mules and horses. While searching, he met Elijah. When Obadiah saw Elijah, he bowed to him, and they talked. Elijah asked Obadiah to tell Ahab that he was going to pay him a visit. Justifiably, Obadiah was afraid to tell King Ahab because the king and Jezebel wanted to kill Elijah. They sent men in other nations looking for him. In fact, the king had made these nations swear that Elijah was not in their country. The king was seriously looking for Elijah. Note, Obadiah knows the king well. He knew that if he reported that Elijah will meet with the king, and then the Spirit moved Elijah to escape again, the king would kill Obadiah. Obadiah reminds Elijah, says, I've worshiped Yahweh since my youth. I even hid hundreds of Yahweh's prophets in 2 caves, feeding and supplying them with water, endangering myself, acting on my faith to save them. But what you're asking me, that's just a bit too much. Let's face it, based on Elijah's escape record, he would not meet the king, and the king would kill Obadiah. Elijah promises to keep the meeting, and ultimately, Obadiah did as Elijah asked, and Ahab meets with Elijah. So Elijah confronts Ahab, and Ahab greets him saying, well, you're the troublemaker. Even today, when those who stand up for right against those who stand in power, oftentimes those standing for right are labeled troublemakers because what is right may not be what is popular. Obadiah had the courage to deliver the message to Ahab. Elijah had the courage to speak truth to power. Note here, Elijah doesn't accept the label of troublemaker. Since time immemorial, we've liked to put labels on people in order to justify putting them to death or killing them. Elijah says to the king and your family are the real troublemakers. You see, the king wanted to enforce man's law. Elijah is seeking to enforce the highest law, that of Yahweh. The king and his family had strayed from the law of God, following Baal. Like Elijah, our standing for God's word does not cause problems. Problems are caused by straying from God's words. But still, sometimes the world would rather shoot the messenger than listen to the message. That's the lesson for this week. Have a great week. Bye.